Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Anastasia Panagakos, and on behalf of CRC Anthropology Department, I would like to welcome you to Anthro Stories featuring Edgar Huerta. Anthro Stories is an occasional speaker series which seeks to highlight the academic, career, and personal journeys of anthropologists working and learning in the Northern California area. The goal is to give our students exposure to the varied and diverse perspectives found in anthropology, a discipline which studies the whole experience of what it means to be human, from present day to ancient societies, to our biology and evolution, and to our language and culture. Before we begin today, I want to remind everyone to please silence your cell phones and that photography or video recording is prohibited. If you are attending for extra credit, please be sure to put your name on the sign-in sheets that are found in the lobby on your way out if you haven't done so already. Please also note that today's presentation is being recorded and will be made available on CRC's YouTube channel in the future. And thank you, Michael Bittner, for taking care of that aspect of the filming for us today. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Rhonda Merrill and Carolyn Vasquez, who are CRC anthropology majors, who will start our event today by interviewing our invited speaker, Edgar, who is a second-year archaeology graduate student from UC Davis. Please welcome Rhonda, Carolyn, and Edgar.
Well, hello, Edgar. Thank you for being with us. I think we should just jump right in. So you were born in Mexico. Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and childhood there in Mexico?
Well, it's interesting because I was born in the borderline right between Mexico City and the state of Mexico, about maybe 20 kilometers or so from Teotihuacan. And the town that I lived during my childhood was called San Martin Azcatepec. And at that time, I didn't know I wanted to be an archaeologist, but I guess I was lucky because everywhere I went, along the fields of corn or magueys to make pulque, I will see archaeological remains everywhere. I'll see ceramics and obsidian, and I'll see them all the time, just scattered around. And I remember I used to always like to go and collect big pieces of obsidian. And at the time, I had no idea that I was going to be an archaeologist someday. I just liked to do that. It grabbed my attention. I was the older of the kids, and I was always very interested in learning from nature. I used to just leave the house and walk around and learn about, observe things that I would see on the road. And then the school that I went to, it was very encouraging because they'll take us in excursions and they'll talk to us about the ancient cultures that lived there, like Teotihuacan. And when I talk about my research, it's kind of interesting because I didn't know that what I was doing as a kid eventually later on will come back to be part of my life in a big way, as it is today.
So you said that as a kid was when you really first noticed that you had kind of this interest. Was there like an aha moment where you were like, anthropology is the profession for you and that was where your life was going?
You know, my aha moment didn't came when I was a kid. It came later when I joined community college. But that's when I realized that, hey, wait a minute, I should do that. I used to love to do that. And I got the yearn to learn more about where I came from, basically. And I got very interested in the archaeology, and that was my aha moment, mainly. When I was a kid, I didn't really thought about it as in terms of archaeology or anything like that. In my mind, I just knew that it was some individuals lived there a long time ago, and they were making these little pieces of materials that I used to find on the road.
All right. So being from Mexico, you are an AB 540 student. What does that mean for anybody who doesn't know, and what kind of challenges has that posed for you in your academic career?
Well, I came here as a child when I was 12 years old. And so an AB 540 basically means that you were brought by your parents without a visa. And when you're here in that situation, it's incredibly challenging. At least it was for me when I started. I was one of the few that started that early back in 1991. And for anybody that is in my situation today, there's a lot more possibilities now than there were back then for me. In fact, I was at community college. After I graduated from high school in 1995, I was at community college for about 6 years because I wasn't able to transfer to a university system because of my status. But those 6 years for me were great because a lot of the research that I'm doing today, and you'll see in a little bit, the reason why I'm able to do it is because of all the geology classes that I took, all the biology and chemistry classes that I took that allow me to take on these projects where I could actually participate on very neat things about human behavior and learning about ancient cultures. And the challenges was that, the monetary aid is not there, so there were times where I had to go full-time and go to school full-time. One of the toughest things that I ever had to do was to work full-time doing construction work and then go to school at night. I did that for a whole semester. Don't do that. You will collapse by the end of the semester. But even though it was challenging, and you always live pretty much in fear, you don't take for granted certain simple things that for other people are able to do every day. I wasn't able to do that. I wasn't able to just go and get a license, or I wasn't able to go and just apply for a job that I could get. I wasn't able to apply for scholarships, and I wasn't able to apply for many things that would have helped me succeed. But I knew what I wanted to do, and I kept working on it, and eventually I gotten this far just by sticking to my goals. And for anybody that is here having the same situation, this is not just for people in the situation, but for anybody, just have a goal in mind and keep going. It's gonna be hard and difficult, but if you have something that you wanna accomplish, just go for it, and eventually it'll happen.
Thank you very much. So what can you tell us about your experience with UC Davis so far?
My experience with UC Davis has been great. I was very lucky to have been admitted and received the Distinguished Dean Graduate Fellowship, which is basically what has allowed me to attend a doctorate program. And in the department, they're very supportive, and they have, I think it's one of the top evolutionary anthropology schools in the nation. So all the professors are very helpful, and they always giving you ideas on how to become a better researcher, a better student. And there's a lot of possibilities, especially for students in my situation that are AB 540. There's a lot of help for people like you. But in general, they're very progressive, willing to help anybody with any kind of hardship that they're following through, work it out basically for you in order to succeed.
Great. And I'm sure there are a lot of people here who are thinking of transferring to UC Davis. Carolyn, you're one of them. Do you have any tips or advice for anybody who's thinking of attending UC Davis?
Yeah, sure. What I will suggest you do, and if you're gonna go to UC Davis, is if most important thing is to start your application early. Don't wait till the last minute because it takes longer than you think it's gonna take. If you haven't taken the GRE, take the GRE, at least half a year in advance, because that's the only time you can only take it after every certain amount of time. You could take it as many times as you want in a year, but you have to wait a month. So if you take it, in November, you're not going to have enough time to retake it. And just, some departments they don't just consider the GRE, but it's good to have taken care of because that also helps you with the scholarships and fellowships. Another thing that I will suggest you do is that you try to volunteer if you're going to UC Davis, and if you're going to go to anthropology, or even if you're going to go to another discipline for the matter, try to do a little bit of research and find the professors that you want to work with and ask them, can I get involved with some of your research, maybe as a volunteer, maybe as an assistant researcher, for volunteer a few hours, because they get to know you and they know that you want to do the work. I don't say that it's going to guarantee you that you'll get in, but it'll open your doors a little bit more. And that has worked for me, not just at UC Davis, but in my whole career, is don't be afraid to ask the questions. Because the worst that could happen is they're going to tell you no. And if you don't ask the question, just like I learned, then later on you're gonna be, I should have asked that question. So always ask. And one thing that I'm gonna tell you is, if you ask somebody and you send an email, and they don't get back to you, don't get discouraged, because remember, we're all people, we all have lives. And sometimes it's just a matter that they haven't gotten a chance to get back to you. You send them another email, wait a few days, and then if you don't hear from them, that's fine, but always ask and be willing to move forward with your goals.
That is excellent advice, I think. So you are studying or going to be studying ancient diets and the transition to complex societies for humans. I know you're just getting started on that. We talked a little, you don't have a lot of data on it, but is there anything that has been surprising that you've stumbled upon so far just looking at this, or any surprises?
Yes, one of the surprises that I have stumbled on is, especially in the area of the world that I work in, Mesoamerica, is that the work, there's not a lot of this type of work trying to reconstruct Asian studies. Now, that is because of the nature of some of the archaeological sites and where they are. Because we're dealing with organics, sometimes in regions like the tropics, for example, organics don't preserve really well, and that's what you need to attempt this reconstruction and figure out how people live and how they eat. And reconstructing the diet is just part of the process, but that tells us about what possibly, social networks where they're trading with somebody, things like that. But what I find out is that with new technologies, you could actually analyze even bones that have been deteriorated very badly, because now you're trying to use, for example, genetics or proteomics that allows you to look at an even more specific region of the DNA and actually determine whether it's a plant or animal, human, or whether consuming. And that's been very surprising to me, because that opens the door for me with a lot of those things. As I'm going to explain to you later, a lot of the hypotheses and questions regarding how people live and what they were eating, especially in the region that I work, they are derived from looking at materials like ceramics or tools and what they were using to process what things. But we don't have a very good fine-tuning on exactly the amount or the season or the years, and that's what I'm trying to do with what I'm doing at UC Davis.
Cool. So again, you just started this, so if you don't have an answer to this, that's fine. But is there something from the ancient diet that maybe you know about now that you would want to try from like the ancient diet in Mexico?
Actually, I have put myself in a, both my family, my mom and my dad, they have sugar problems, and I'm susceptible to it. And I've been started taking care of myself, and I have been looking at ancient diets, for example, like different ways of cooking nopales, which I love, or ways of cooking cactus, which are delicious. And when I was doing some of the research for the Tehuacan Valley, which is one of the sites where you see the earliest domestication of corn, you also find other things like prickly pear cactus and things like that. And so those are foods I have been around for a long time. When I was a kid, I didn't like them. I was like, yuck. But now that I understand the importance of it, and they actually are very good for you if you do it, if you consume them the right way. That's what I've learned to appreciate more what our ancestors that live in those regions were used to eat every day.
So you're obviously very passionate about anthropology, to kind of switch gears. Who's your favorite anthropologist or archaeologist, and why do they inspire you?
Well, my favorite anthropologist is Michael Coe, who unfortunately just passed away. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Michael Coe. He's a very famous Mesoamerican archaeologist. And he is the one that, the first time he really inspired me is that I read his book on breaking the Maya code. And he talks about how the code was broken. And there's a chapter there that talks about how there was this group of researchers. One day he walked into this room and they were trying to figure out how to read these symbols that nobody could understand. And what really got me excited about that is that he says, there were different groups doing this. But many of them were fighting among each other. Well, we have the right answer. No, we have the right answer. And he said, the day that I walked in the room and I saw this group of archaeologists, everybody, and epigraphers and art historians, everybody working together and complementing each other's arguments, that's the day that I wanted to be in that team. And that's very important because a lot of the work that I do, I wouldn't be able to do it if I wasn't for the help of other colleagues. Research is not a single individual goal. You have to rely on other people. And that's why it's always good to make connections with other people. Even if you think that, well, I don't want to study that, if you have an interest that's related to your career, try to learn a little bit about it, because collaboration is what Michael coined a chapter illustrated for me what you do as an archaeologist. To understand humanity, you have to, something that's so complex, you have to be willing to work as a team.
So do you have any final thoughts for students who are going into anthropology or want to pursue that as a career?
Well, I think it is a great career. I think that you really have to love it, but it's very rewarding. It's very rewarding. And what I will advise you to do is that always keep in mind that you're gonna be, throughout your career, you're gonna be looking at a lot of materials, a lot of things, but always keep in mind that it's not necessarily about the materials, because our end goal is to learn about people, right? What you're gonna see today in my presentation, there's gonna be some methods, but that's just a tool. Our goal as an anthropologist and archaeologist is to describe to people that are not that, how is it that our ancestors live, even from very early in our evolutionary history, up to very complex societies. And so always remember that it's not about the artifacts, because sometimes, even I did it myself, you get so focused on the artifacts that you kind of forget that you are doing this in order to talk about the bigger picture and hopefully help those communities, for example, Native American communities, to also have access to their history, right? Because sometimes, because of the unfortunate events of colonization, many of them lost a lot of their heritage. One of the very rewarding experiences that I had is that I'm also a fleet napper. I make stone tools. And I was asked to make this video for a community of Tarascan Indians in central Michoacan in Mexico, because even though their nation flag has an obsidian arrowhead on it, they did not understand how those were made, because they were told by the Spaniards that they were made by lightning. And they were not allowed to practice these customs because they were told it was evil because of religion. And so they lost that tradition of them. And so I felt very fortunate to be asked to make a video, and I see this in a museum where I demonstrate to them how their ancestors were making these really amazing stone tools and what techniques they were using. And that's what I say, always think about the people that you're studying. The artifacts are little guides to get there, but you have to think about the people, and that's the thing that I really want to keep in mind.
Well, thank you for letting us
Thank
ask
you.
you a few questions. We're looking forward to the rest of your presentation,
Okay.
which will happen now.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm going to start my presentation. So what I'm going to talk to you today is what has led me to, basically what led me to UC Davis, and it's part of my research. So as you see from the title, I specialize in using archaeometric techniques, which basically means that it's different ways of analyzing materials like ceramics, soils, obsidian, tar, or bitumen. And from that data, derive models that allow me to see how people were living, how were they organizing the way of life based on what they needed to survive. How much time can we spend making pottery? How much time can we spend making stone tools? And why do we make specific types of stone tools? What applications do they have? And the reason why I call it Insights into Ancient Diet Studies is because a lot of this research is not necessarily going to deal with the diet part of it, but by the end of my presentation, hopefully you're able to see that this is what triggered me to look into that, because everything is related. When you're looking at ancient societies and you're trying to reconstruct their culture or their lifestyle, you kind of have to look at everything. And sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming, but it's very rewarding when you figure a small part of it. And that's what I'm going to talk about it today. So the site of Los Soldados is located in the Gulf Coast of central Mexico. There's the site there. And anybody is familiar with the Olmecs here? Okay, so the Olmecs was considered one of the first complex civilizations in central Mexico, particularly the Gulf Coast. they will carve these huge stone monuments, like this monument right there in the side of San Lorenzo. There's about 18 of those, and this one is about 8 feet tall, and it weighs about 20 tons. And they will carry the stone to make these monuments from volcanoes that were like 80 kilometers away. And the way they did it is that they used big canoes that were covered with tar to prevent them from sinking. And that's how I want to start the first part of my presentation, because that was the very first thing that I did as an archaeologist when I got introduced to crust spatialization by my other colleagues. So what is bitumen? Basically, archaeological bitumen is tar, what you see on the road paved. Well, the Olmecs, about 3,500 years ago, they also processed it and made it. And so this is a piece of tar. And the interesting thing about it is that they didn't just process it, but they actually had recipes. And one of the first things that I did was that I was assigned, when one of my old professors find out that I was able to do petrographic analysis for the same reason that I took the geology courses earlier. He says, we know a lot about ceramics, but we want to see if this tar was processed, because we think they had different recipes for different jobs. So there was a recipe for caulking canoes so they wouldn't sink in the water. There was a recipe for finishing floors, for gluing a stone, for makeup or decoration of statues. But nobody had really looked at, is that really the case? And why is that important? Because if you have organized production of materials, that means that there is a system to produce those materials. And the system eventually translates into what aspects of culture dictate how the system is going to run. It's run by politicians, it's run by gender-based approaches. Was it produced full-time or part-time? And so as you can see here, all of those, so the black part is the tar, and all of those little inclusions that you see there, those are what they were adding to the tar. So they will add sand or organic fibers, and we have some chemical evidence that they were also adding some type of plant sap into that to make glues for that reason. So the first thing that I did is I got about 400 samples. And when you do research like this, like I was saying earlier, you have to make sure that you cover whatever possible things could alter your data. So the first thing that I needed to do is I needed to make sure that what we were seeing in there wasn't just contamination, because these tar deposits, which are essentially oil deposits, they occur in the open sometimes, and you could get contamination into them from sand or from fibers or from other things getting there. And the first thing that I needed to test was that, is it really being added for specific purposes, or is it just accidental? So that's the first question that I wanted to answer. So I didn't want to say and go, oh, they were using it for this, because I wanted first, my hypothesis, I wanted to either prove it or disprove it, and I wanted to make sure that we were looking at actual processes rather than just accidental deposition of materials. So I look at the 400 pieces, cut them up in half with a regular microscope, look at them, and I saw some patterns, right? But it's very hard to, at this level of magnification, it's actually really hard to look at things, and it's really hard to quantify them so that you could get to a particular way of actually showing that there's a pattern here. So my next step was that I called petrographic analysis. And what that is that I use a type of microscope that basically has transmitted light. And what I do is we'll send the samples to Canada, and they will carry them very thin, and they'll put them in these microscope slides. And they're so thin, it's about the thickness of one hair. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to look in the microscope and identify So you see all those little grains there? So that's crushed granite. All of these have crushed granite in there. That's a piece of metamorphic stone. And those little fibers there, that's grass. Notice that these ones don't have anything on it, and I'm gonna show you why in a minute. So these, if you look at the numbers there, it tells you the archaeological sites they came from, and these samples represent gold walnut sites for about 1250 to 500 BC. So that's very early. So that early, they were already processing bitumen. So once I do this and identified what they were adding into it, then I have to quantify it. And in order to do that is that I have to take, and what I'm gonna show you next looks very complicated, but it's just so that you kind of get an idea of how I do it. You don't have to, it's gonna look very, but it's more so you see the methods that sometimes we use. So I take every microscopic slide and put it under the microscope and identified everything that I think is there, whether it's quartz or metamorphic stone, and what kind of crystals, quartz, feldspar, plagioclase, whatever the rocks are being constituted of. Then what I do is I make a chart like this of everything that is there. And notice, for example, quartz, not just abbreviation, plagioclase, potassium, feldspar, lithics, micas, dense minerals. And you go down the list, and those are all the stuff that I observed and that I identified. So that's just making a list of what's there once I identify it. So the next thing is that what I do is I put the material on the microscope, right? And I have to have a stage, and you move it, 1 millimeter at a time. Every time you move the stage 1 millimeter, you look down the ocular, and whatever is in the crosshair of the microscope, whether it's a grain of quartz or just bitumen or a piece of grass, and you identified what kind of mineral it is, I count it. So for every microscope slide, I count it 200 times. I move the stage 1 millimeter 200 times. And you could do that manually, but they also have electronic ones now, so it's faster. So once you do that, you get a tally of how much of certain things are there, because that actually tells you what kind of rock it came from. So if you have 90% crushed quartz, and you have something like that, that tells you that it came from a piece of quartzite, which is a piece of metamorphic sandstone. So it's like sand in the beach that has, over millions of years, has been hardened by pressure and heat. And so from that, this one, remember I told you how you have to make sure that the method works? And so the rule for me is, for every scientist, is that if I do it, any other researcher that does this will get about the same results. And if that's the case, then that means that this is very reliable to measure how much of the material that are in there. This is just to look at, so those are all the samples, and and these are the things that were counted. So that's bitumen, quartz, plagioclase, feldspar, lithics, which is basically pieces of stone. That's mica, that's voids, and then you also measure the fibers. So it depends what you see in there, and from that, you create a tally, and you take the data and you log it. So basically, you multiply it so everything equals 1. And what that does, it allows you to graph it in something like this, like ternary diagram. So if you go this way, you went towards bitumen. So if you're looking at a piece of the tar, if most of them fall on this end right here, that means that there's a lot more tar in there than there are pores on that area is temper. Temper is basically the term where archaeology is used to refer to anything that is added by humans, whether it's ceramics, or in this case, tar, or anything that is added to process a particular paste. And we only use that term if we're certain that this one's added by humans. And there's other things that you look at, so you go back and look at those pictures. See, aside from identifying we measure the angularity, whether it's it has a lot of points, or it's a very rounded, because that tells us if it came from a river or if somebody actually picked it up and crushed it and threw it into the midst. And so we did all that, and this is what we find out right here. So this right here, these are all those samples, and I'll explain to you what it means. It's actually pretty cool. So the Cerro San Lorenzo, it was mainly large mineral grains in the tar. And this is interesting because we did some experiments, and actually when you add sand to the tar and you heat it for long periods of time and then it dries, it gets really hard. Because the oxidation causes all the water vapor to leave and it just gets really hard. Most of these pieces came actually from a channel that was built with volcanic stone, and they were using the tar to glue them together. These ones right here, these are the same. They had the same amount of content as these of large mineral grains, but these are from a different side, and they were also found in a similar contest, where they were being used to kind of glue together pieces of stone. El Bajío right here says pyroxene is a type of mineral that you find on river sediments, but what is interesting about this is that it had a lot of grass added to it. And the reason why they were adding grass to the bitumen is because you want to, it's because to make the canoes waterproof. So there's flexibility on it. And these came from contests that actually had impressions, the bitumen had impressions that it had been used on a canoe. And I don't have a picture of it because I couldn't get, but they have found about 20 feet long canoes that the wood is gone, but the tar, the bitumen that they were transporting, because they used to make this in big quantities, they used to make like this like cakes of it and store it underground. And they found these big long canoes that basically it's just bitumen. But it left the canoe left the impression behind because they think they used to carry all this processed bitumen to different areas and trade it. And the way you process it is that you heat it up in the heat and you add additives to it. And all of these ones right here, it has no temper on it, so it doesn't have any additives on it. But we also find out that they added something more like a tree sap. So that was fun. That it appears to have been used as a glue, basically. And then this one is La Lore, the minimal temper, and Paso los Ortizes. All of those, they mainly had inclusions on it that were organic mostly. And most of this came from big pieces of bitumen. My colleague found a big deposit of it that was covered with broken shirts to protect it because it was very valuable. And it was used on every day. Oh, sorry. So that's the ceramic part. So that's one part of it. Then they came to me and said, well, let's do this with the ceramics, see what you can figure out. Because they came to me, and when you look at ceramics in archaeological sites, especially in Mesoamerica, it's kind of scary because you walk into a room full of bags of shirts, broken pieces of ceramic, basically, and you have to look through all of those. So they came to me and say, Edgar, we want you to simplify our typology. We had about 150 types. And this is how they were categorized. So you have your shirt, you have orange, and then you have guise, compacto, media burda, and burda. What those terms mean is that the guise, you don't see any additives in it. The compacto, you don't see any additives in it. It's just like ceramics, but I'm going to show you something in a minute. Then the media burda and the bursa, they have grains of quartz on it. But we have because of the colors, you have 150 types. You have naranja, nucleo gris, and then they have brown, nucleo negro, and then they have bicolor, orange, black, and then they have red. And I mean, okay, there's got to be a better way. So what we came up with is that rather than using the typology and look at the course, I look at the content of the clay itself, same as the bitumen. And so this right here, that's volcanic ash on the geeses. The compactus, that's volcanic ash. The media burda, that's coarse grains, and the burda, that's coarse grains. Notice that the burda has very big grains. That's because those pots were used for cooking. The pots right here, they were very thin wall. Those were used for drinking beverages. And so I was able to basically cut down the typology by doing the same thing that I did with the bitumen, where I look at the microscope and then I figure out the percentage of what was present there as far as the amount of temper. And then that allowed me to just kind of graph. And you could see here that all the geeses, the one that supposedly didn't have anything on it added, have volcanic ash, and the compactus also have volcanic ash. And then the media burda and the burda, they don't have any, basically. And this is very simplistic because this was done in the field. So in the field, you kind of do things the simple way first. But then I did the same thing as I did with the ceramic, with the bitumen, and counted the proportions. And I was able to basically test that that was really the case. We were seeing ceramic ash used to temper the thin wall ceramics. And from that, we were able to separate the bowls into serving bowls, cooking bowls, and then bowls that were like platters to serve food. And that is important. I'll tell you why in a minute, and it's going to be related to what I'm doing later on the future. It's another picture of some of the geese in compacto with the volcanic ash. It looks like little shirts. So when the volcano explodes, it spews out all this glassy material, and it looks like little sheds. And they are to the pottery because it's easier to fire them. They don't explode when you're firing them because volcanic ash has a very high heating threshold. So we concluded that the soldados, the volcanic ash from los soldados had temper on it. And so that told us about the household, how they were organizing their activities. And what we're looking at is that the ceramics and the bitumen, because they're both fire technologies, they were probably done at the same time. Because think about it, you have to go and you have to get fire to fire your ceramics. You don't want to do that twice. And they were probably done seasonally during summer when it wasn't rainy. And La Venta is one of the very big regional centers that is about 10 kilometers from the Cerro de los Soldados. And we think that La Venta, they didn't control the towns around them, but a lot of the materials that they were exporting out of there were produced by communities like Los Soldados, basically. Because over 600 years, they haven't changed their way of making things. It didn't look like they changed for different things to making them. And then one more thing that I want to share with you. Then we had to look at the obsidian. So we have the bitumen, we have the ceramics. Okay, but how they're processing the stuff that they're cooking? You know, why are they processing their knives? Where's the obsidian getting from? So to do that, I use something that's called X-ray fluorescence and laser ablation. So basically what it does is, in this case, you irradiate the obsidian with X-rays, and it tells you the chemical composition of the obsidian. And you could figure out what volcano or what volcanic region it came from. And that tells you a lot about trade and were they using a specific obsidian for specific tools. And the LSA PMS is the same thing, except with that, you shoot it with a laser. And the difference is that with the laser ablation, you have more control of what you want to analyze. The XRF, it shoots the whole piece of obsidian. The LSA PMS, you could select certain areas, like to, for example, find the analytical composition of ash, for example, volcanic ash. These are some of the examples of the two. Those are blades. And obsidian blades were very popular in Mesoamerica as tools. Some of them were about that long. And they'll get this blade and they'll trade them over hundreds of miles. And they'll break them into pieces and shape them into different tools. You can see that this one has notches on it. These are really tiny pieces because in the site that we're working on, they were working with really tiny pieces. And that's what we're trying to figure out. What is it that they were processing with those tiny pieces? Some of them are, the biggest ones are only like 3 centimeters in length, and most of them are less than a centimeter. And we don't see anything else other than that. So once you do the chemicals, you get a signature back and you compare it with other database, and it basically tells you, you get all the samples and it tells you, for example, this one came from Sierra de Pachuca, which is green, and it's a volcanic area in northern Mexico. This one came from Paredon in central Mexico. This one came from Zaragoza, Guadalupe, Victoria. So we have about, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and about 9 sites and this one as far as Guatemala, these two right here. These are just some of the numbers. We sent some of the stuff to Missouri Research Reactor to be analyzed too. So in total, we analyzed about, including these ones, 401 pieces of obsidian. In here, we do it by the tools. And this is interesting right here, the Pico de Orizaba and San Martin Jilotepec right here. They seem to have the largest percentage of the obsidian that was coming in. The interesting thing about that's the site of Los Soldados. This is El Chayal, San Martin Jilotepec in Guatemala. So that's about 400 kilometers that they were trading these obsidian sources. And then they were trading some from central Mexico from other sites. And the interesting thing is they were doing that for 600 years. And they didn't change the shape of their tools. So we think that they were not accessing the big piece. They were not getting the big pieces, but they were accessing kind of like recycled parts of it. And we think that they were able to control some of the resources because they were making a lot of pottery and processing a lot of bitumen, which was we were able to trade. And all the train routes go through there, what is called during the Middle Formative, which is about 900 to about 600 BC. And from that, so what does it tell me about cultural developments? Well, we know that ceramics appear in 1900, 1750 on the coast of BC, on the coast of Chiapas, Valley of Highland, Mexico, Gulf Coast of northern Veracruz. And then after 7 Peter, it pretty much spreads through all of Mesoamerica, right? And bitumen starts actually a lot earlier. That's why I put a question mark there, because that's actually about 2500 BC. You start to see pits where they were doing offerings and decorating their little wooden statues with bitumen. There's a term called intersecting technologies. And what that means is by Melissa Armstrong. What that means is that pottery production, bitumen production, they were done congruently, basically. They're all pyrotechnic technologies that need fire to be processed, right? But of course, people had to eat, right? You don't just live off making pottery and making obsidian. These were made to produce your food. So what I want to do with my research is, so we have the data for the pottery, we have the data for the obsidian, and we have the data for the bitumen, which was used for transportation and transporting grains and things like that, to transport the big boulders to make the Olmec heads, right? But what I want to find out is that about 90% of that information, of the hypothesis that we have of how what people were eating are based on the ceramics and the obsidian. So the material part. We know very little about how much of that was being consumed by the actual inhabitants of these archaeological sites. And so that's what I want to do. I want to take the data that I have from here and integrate it with, by looking at stable isotopes, which basically you measure the oxygen in your bones, sulfur, nitrogen, and it tells you what kind of diet you were eating. Were you a meat eater? Were you eating coastal foods? Or do you have a plant-based diet? And why is that important for the stuff that I showed you previously? Because if I have a set of ceramics that are telling me, oh, this was used to drink. Oh, this was used to process a particular type of food. Okay, what kind of food was it? We don't know. We have an idea that it's corn, but we don't know for sure. We also don't know to what level they were consuming the corn. Was the corn being consumed by them? Because contrary to popular belief, a lot of people think that corn, when civilizations in Mexico, and especially Central America, became very complex, they think that it was because of the corn. And now that doesn't because of corn agriculture, but now it looks like that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems like social complexity started out earlier, and their think is attributed to the production of alcoholic drinks for social events. So you have different groups of people getting together for marriage purposes or for inter-village trade. What do you do when you get together and you want to make friends, right? You have social events. And so what I'm trying to figure out is how the information that I have about the pottery, so if they were only making serving vessels, why? What was the obsidian that they were using those tools? What was they processing it with? Sometimes I could analyze the tools themselves, but that's very rare, as I told you earlier before. Sometimes the organic materials don't survive really well. So the alternative that we have is to look at the osteological remains, either of humans or other animals that are in the region, because that tell us not just what they were eating, but whether or not they were doing it seasonally, or was it only a particular set of the population that was doing it, or are some of the observations that we look with the manufacturer of pottery and the types, or how the obsidian tools were being used, like why they were using these little tiny blades for like 600 years. What were they processing with those? Fishing, maybe? Or whatever they were doing, we need to figure out that by looking at the diet of the actual individuals, or even the animals themselves. And that is where my next goal of my project and my PhD dissertation is going to focus, is to take this data and then look at how that data of ancient diets is going to support the hypotheses that have been put forward by looking just at the material part. I think there's going to be some variation, because I don't necessarily think that by focusing on just the material things, we're going to figure out all that there is to figure out, and you never do. But we're trying to get a very good educated guess of where it's going. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation. And one more thing that I want to say is, these are all the methods, as I said earlier. The goal of us is to take this, like I'm doing here, and figure out actually how it worked with people that live, thousands or hundreds of years ago. Thank you.